We're just waiting for LinkedIn because it never cooperates.
It'll be here.
Eventually, LinkedIn will figure out what to do with
LinkedIn
us.
gets there eventually.
Um, let's hope it works. I'm still not seeing it on the LinkedIn side, but maybe it is working. So I guess we can just, yep, it's there. Cool. Now
Yeah.
we are officially live on LinkedIn.
Okay.
Okay. Hello and welcome back to Lunchable Go-to-Market Ops. We're your hosts, and I'm going to mute that because I'm echoing myself. We're your hosts, Danielle Urban and
Sarah Lane-Hawn.
serving up grab and go HubSpot strategy every weekday in 15 minutes or less. And in today's episode, we're going to be talking about some little hacks and best strategies we found around managing multi-select properties and multi-check properties. We learned a little too late how to import things. And
A little too late, but also things changed recently. And so I'm excited. So I think like everybody run, don't walk to your HubSpot admin and like make sure that they know this, because as people who are in HubSpot every day, multi-select fields in general have always been a bane to anybody who's an admin, to try to maintain and manage and update without overwriting. And like, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, Danielle, but I think that's why everybody hates them. Is that the like general reason? Because like there is strong opinions about multi-select fields when you talk to like data people. Like,
yeah,
is that the main reason they hate them? Is just the management and upkeep?
I have to assume so because it really has never been easy.
No.
But I have seen some exciting things. So I think there was that update that Kyle Jepson covered either maybe early this week. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's a time warp with Thanksgiving last week, but where I think you have options on how you update multi-select now.
Yeah, and his was about the bulk update option. And so here, let me actually, I can share my screen real quick because I'm a visual learner myself. But yeah, if you're in your contacts now, you can actually go in and find one of your multi-select items. And not only can you bulk edit to select multiple ones here, but when you do it, you have the options now to determine like, are we going to actually just append this to things that are already there? Are we actually going to overwrite it and replace everything? Or do we want to remove these from the current values on people's settings? So that is the update that's new
Yeah.
in terms of system functionality. And I'm really grateful for that, because I actually had a client email me this week with a event list where they had focused the entire theme around one specific product offering. And so everybody that engaged with them, they were like, great, we can update their product interest field, and we want to add this particular product of interest. And immediately for them, they went, red flag. Am I going to overwrite old product interests? How do I make sure it just depends? Because they were trying to check two at a time. So it seemed even more possible that they might overwrite something. So this is great, because I know if they get it into the system, we can bulk edit it right here if we need to. Like, even if we don't write an SOP for how to do the upload process. So yeah, I'm very excited about that one.
Yeah, I love that because you were either flying blind in trying to update it with the bulk update like you just showed, or
Yeah.
you'd have to go into a workflow and use a workflow to push it in so that you could really define how it was done. Or you did it via import, but that also was a little confusing. And I would always have to go back into the documentation to understand what would exactly happen when I imported it. Which brings us to our next hack. And this is the one that we all learned way too late. And that is the use of semicolons in your upload. So
Yeah. Apparently, you can use a
apparently I didn't knew this.
semicolon at the beginning of your field values, and it automatically then appends them. Like, it's just, I mean, it makes sense. It's a syntax thing, right? But like, never in a million years. And good for you for being a student and actually reading documentation. I just test things 3 times
Just need to make
until
sure
I
I'm
figure
uploading
out
it right.
how it's supposed to work, and then I start doing it. But yeah, the semicolon hack is fantastic. I haven't had a chance to test it yet. Have you tested it in?
I have used it. I feel like I learned it way too late, but I did learn it like a year ago, because it was one of those
Okay,
things
so
where I
not way too late compared to my last week of finding out about
dude,
this
I've been using
statistic.
HubSpot since like 2012, so in my world, it's way too late. So, but it's, I think I've used it in the past. I can't remember when I did a bulk upload, but it's I'm trying to think through some of the use cases where we see these multi-select fields and where that might be so helpful. And
Yeah,
I feel like it always comes back to product interest. Like everyone has a product interest multi-check or has like an asset category.
yeah,
I know I've seen that on hidden properties and forms, like an asset categorization, which we'll
yes.
hopefully talk about next week. Uh,
Yeah, hidden properties that you use for really internal elements is what I'd say predominantly is where you're going to run into it. And I do still think, I mean, multi-select fields should be used cautiously, right?
mhm,
Because even when we talked about using custom objects, like that's one of the times when if you're having multi-select fields a lot, you should probably pause and be like, do I need a custom object instead to hold this?
mhm,
Um, because I could see people trying to append like latest event attended if they used a multi-select field for that instead of custom objects. Like, but
yeah,
again, no right way. A lot of wrong ways, no right way for sure to do
yeah,
it. But yeah, I think event bulk uploads, anything where you're bringing in a new database, you're gonna want to be able to have additions to what is coming in instead of it just being replacements.
yeah,
Especially I feel like if your sales and marketing team do both bring in new contacts into the system, that's somewhere where like a lot of times people don't know what are new versus what
mhm,
probably already exists. And that's predominantly where I see like the overwriting be a
yeah,
problem because a lot of times people uploading the list just assume these are all net new contacts and they don't think about, hey, we might actually be covering up or replacing some really useful data that's already been here.
yeah,
So the appending, just kind of as your standard methodology is probably a good default to start leaning into. So I might have to change kind of how I think about Excel formatting
yeah,
for bulk uploads and do something where like as default things start with semicolons or something just so that like no matter what it's going to append when I
yeah.
upload it if I forget to kind of think through those steps.
Yeah, we have so many options on the import process, for kind of global settings as you're importing. So, like, you can select upsert, you can select create new contacts only, you can create update contacts only. So, if you kind of know the context, you can choose, only create new. Generally, I create upsert or I set that to upsert, and then if I know it's not supposed to create new contacts and it does, then I go figure out what they are and why that
Yeah,
happened,
who they
because I
were.
know something went wrong and I want to understand why. But I like that you have those options at a high level, but then really when you get into it, you have all those little toggle switches for overwrite this information. And I
Yep.
basically tell people never switch that on unless you know that you're like pushing in a
Better.
net new,
Yeah.
product interest or email address because you literally just talked to them. Like
Yep.
if you absolutely are sure that the content that you're pushing in or the file that you're pushing in is the most up to date, accurate information, then like yeah, overwrite to your heart's content. But
Yep.
most cases that is not true, and so you've got that more finite. Or more granular selection that you can make on each property. But then when it comes to the multi selects, to bring this all back, you don't really have the granularity for that type of property and you need to know that import syntax. So if
Yep.
anybody doesn't know the equals concatenate function in Excel and Google Sheets, go Google equals concatenate. And that is how you can get all your semicolons in without too much extra effort. Um,
Absolutely.
but yeah,
Well,
I
and
would love to think.
this will lean in well tomorrow, because tomorrow is when we're talking about the custom objects in detail and, when and where it's appropriate to pivot from your existing properties. So that'll be a good conversation. And then this week we've talked a lot about data architecture, data maintenance, things kind of in the weeds and the nitty gritty. What are we focusing on next week?
I think we're going to get into some attribution. which is such a meaty, juicy topic that I have avoided for so much
The
of my
topic
career.
everybody loves to hate in marketing operations.
I one of my top performing LinkedIn posts this past year was, "I hate attribution, but I'm becoming an attribution expert," and everyone was like, "Yeah, same."
Yeah, and I think almost everybody's on that same page. So we could talk about that, I feel like, for years, but we'll hit on some of the most hopefully useful things
Yeah,
next week, and then we'll probably circle around to it every so often, just because you're never done. And I think that's
that's
one of
fair.
the reasons people hate it, is because they're trying to just get it done, check it off the board. We have attribution now, but it's not ever done. So
Yeah.
we'll probably never be done with it either.
Yeah, definitely. And it always comes back to, how you're categorizing and tagging things, which of course brings us back to multi-select properties or multi-check properties.
Yeah,
Because if you're using the hidden fields, I'm trying to think through some of these use cases that I've seen in real life. It's always product interest, whether that's on the contact company or deal level. You can just use it as like an early marker for what you should go talk to this person about. And
yep,
that could be fed from a multi-select that is categorizing your content by maybe subject type, or funnel level, as we talked about earlier this week, and we can dive into more next week. But I'm curious if you've seen it anywhere else. I feel like I've seen it badly done with events, or like
yeah,
each content, each asset is as value in it, and that's not how to do it.
yep. Yeah, that's what comes to mind immediately, is the bad use of basically anything that you would have made a list of, just getting
Hmm.
thrown into it. Um, yeah, products, hardware, anything that's like not static, but kind of additive in the relationship, I think, is probably the only other places that
I will. One of
I
my clients who I talk about a lot, uh, they sell to restaurants. And so
mhm,
one of the key things they need to know about restaurants is the way that they serve their customers. So is it a food truck? Is it brick and mortar? Is it,
yeah,
fast casual? Is it a sit down restaurant? And so they've got some multi selects because a lot of people will do like catering out of their food truck.
right.
And so they'll have to select multiple
Oh,
types, but it leads the conversation in very different directions based on what of those combinations are checked.
yeah,
And so it's a
tech
perfect
stack's
use
the
case.
other one that I can think of
Oh, yeah,
for my
good
B2B
one.
SaaS. People is a lot of times having kind of core tech stacks that you wanna be able to select literally everything that you find out about that
Yeah.
company and what they're using, so that you know how your stuff is gonna plug in. And so it's outside of necessarily the competitor list,
Mhm.
which may be a list or maybe an open field. But it's outside of that, and instead it's focusing on the actual tech, the competitor being the other one, that I've seen a lot if they have kind of like their standard top 5
Mhm.
competitors that we always wanna know for sure. Um, Closed one reason is another.
Mm, yep.
Usually you wanna select one of those as your
Right.
primary, but, like, I have had instances where, depending on their nuances, like, they might wanna have something that has a both and, right? Instead of
Yeah.
it all being in one category. Um, yeah, any of the categorical stuff like that. But
Yeah.
then, it depends on how you're gonna use it, just like anything else. Because if you're using it to report on, um, instead of just action for a single company or a single
Mhm.
contact, like, those multi-selects are gonna get a little funky. You're gonna have to be really careful, because now you don't have just things in nice buckets that total up to 100. You have things in partial buckets, right? And
Right.
so, I'd say that would be another, like, red flag. Consider not to doing this. Don't just by default make things in multi-select fields, please.
Right.
Um, because if you wanna report on them as categories, that may not be super useful for you.
Yeah, it can get tricky. So that was one really great gotcha. Are there any other issues or things that people should be looking out for as they wade into this? Those are some really great examples, and
I'd
I
say,
feel like we've
naming convention, right?
yeah.
So, anything that you're using in a multi-select field, especially if you think that that list of options is gonna evolve over time, be sure that your naming is really clear, so that you can add to it, and all of a sudden you're not repeating yourself. a bad example of this is clients who use it for their events. And so you might say like HubSpot inbound conference, right?
Mhm.
Well, if you go and present next year too, well now, oops,
Right.
now that next one's going to be HubSpot inbound 2025, right? But well, we already still have stuff in this other one, and
Yep.
you can get caught up by then by default just marking the wrong thing and creating confusion there. So yeah, really clean, clear
Yeah.
naming
And one more
convention.
note on that, I always harp on internal values. So if you're trying to replace something down the road, like you've changed your taxonomy or you've changed your product offering, you'll have to add a new value and kind of migrate to that new value. Because if you just change the display name, the internal value doesn't
All
change.
stays the same. Yep.
And when you start to pull that reporting into other platforms or try to match it up against something in another platform, it all breaks and falls apart, or it gets really confusing and you have to like create a naming map for everything, and that's
I've
never
made
fun.
some weird naming
Yeah,
maps for sure.
I've found some really odd ones in there. So I think that's a great place to stop for us. And we look forward to talking about custom objects with everybody tomorrow.
Awesome. All right. Talk to you later.
Bye.